Welcome back everyone to another video, and today we're talking about Esperia. Very excited for this one. We've been looking for a couple flashbacks to come here. This was one of them. When that Gunko and Brooke had that moment, we knew, okay, Oda's going to go here at some point. Also, the Emu and Joy Boy flashback, now that we know they were intertwined in the period that Joy Boy is alive. We're waiting for that one too. The Esperia Kingdom. You know, a lot of the flashbacks, we've had a few recently, I say recently, like the last, couple of years. The Herald flashback, I didn't really love that. The God Valley flashback I thought was great, although I would have much preferred if Rocks had a devil fruit. And now we're going into Esperia, and even before reading all of it, I was very excited to see what happened with Brooks' past, what happened with Gunko, because obviously Brooks very old, we knew he's from the West Blue. We didn't know much about exactly his past, what happened in the West Blue, and we're going to figure it out. Now, we're only 3 chapters in, but I wanted to discuss all of what's happening because I think it's really exciting, and this is kind of leading up to what we think is some ideas about Emu and his power of control and how Gunko became a God's Knight, because we have this idea that she's not obviously wanting to do that by her own control. So let's go ahead and get into it, a discussion about the Esperia Kingdom. Okay, so let's start with like the major ticket items of what was the Esperia Kingdom. Spoiler. Uh, Everything about it. And then we're going to get into the theories, because obviously if you read 1185, the very end, there's a lot of interesting things happening at the very end. We're going to get to that, but at first, I do want to talk about, like, the way we lead up to it. We knew it was going to happen, but, like, Usopp, Brooke, Nami, and Jinbei are having a conversation. Jinbei's like, whoa, whoa, whoa! Before we do anything, does she live or die? Excuse me? At what point have we ever had a Straw Hat say that? Or anything in that adjacent realm? I get it, she's a problem, and if she gets out of the ice and wakes up, maybe she can start becoming evil again, but we've never done that. But anyways, that is the catalyst for the conversation of Esperia. So we go back to 70 years ago. Currently, Brooke is 90. We met him at 88. 2-year time skip. He's 90. 70 years ago, he is 20. And at this point, he is already the leader of the Raider Squad, which is one of the military barracks of the Esperia Kingdom. And we also get to meet Princess Cherie, who of course is Gunko, when she's 7 years old. And we also learn that Brooks likes her mom, Candel. Okay, who we would assume is the queen of the kingdom, but we'll get there in a little bit. And then we get to meet the king, King Reuben, who Roven. Eventually, when I first saw him, I thought this looks like a bad guy, just like his face. And apologies, Reuben. I feel bad about that one because it appears that he's a really nice guy. He just looks old. I think he's in his late 30s at this point. But we then learn that the Don Mullen gang, horseback gang, has arrived in town square, and they're looking to go capture Queen Candel, who was in the opera house. And when I first read that, I read Don Marlin, and it took me going back again to go, wait a minute, first of all, timeline-wise, I don't think that makes sense. But, like, Don Marlin was also from the West Blue, a gangster, so you can understand my confusion, and I'm sure some of you did too. And I think if you go on, like, the One Piece Wikipedia or whatever it is, they even mention that, like, don't get that confused, because I did for a second there. They're coming to capture Queen Candel at the Opera House, and this is when Brooke is 20, and the king's freaking out, and then Brooke's like, wait a minute, I think I cut them at the port. Yeah, and then we cut over and seeing them getting cut, because it's like that whole thing with some of the swordsmen. Zoro, Brooke has done this where, like, and then they get cut later, but apparently this was way later. So Brooke had already used his quick draw technique. So at this point, Brooke was kind of a revered swordsman in the kingdom, but everyone hated his music. He goes by Raider Squad Humming Brooke. So that's mostly 1183. We learn about what happened 7 years ago when Brooke was 20. We get to 1184. Princess Cherie is 14. So 7 years have passed. Brooke is 27. Now Brooke is actually the battle commander of the entire military force in Esperia Kingdom. That was previously held by Candel, but actually, that at one point that was Candel, but we don't know who was between her because she was already the queen when he was 20, when he was not the commander. So Cherie is 14, and we get a couple weird moments here. Oda's been giving us a little bit of this lately, where Brooke likes Candel, which is fine. We know he likes women, but then Cherie's like really trying to hit on Brooke when she's like 14, and it's like, maybe not. We're gonna move all by that. But then we get the backstory of how Brooke met Reuben. So we get to see Brooke first at 11 years old. His family is already dead of starvation at this point. Brooke is a very poor child. He lives in like a trash dump. And we get to see him like looking into the gates of like a school where kids are learning music, and clearly he wants to learn music. Because I think I forgot to mention Esperia Kingdom. The kingdom of musical instruments. That's what they're all about, which makes a ton of sense. That's why Brooks likes music so much. So Brooke at age 11, having a tough time. He's just on his violin, making music in like the trash dump, and then just King Reuben, who is currently the prince at this time, he's 21 years old, is like, hey, that music sucks. But eventually they get to know each other. He starts to like the music. Brooke offers him food, and they just become friends. Reuben's kind of thinking about how his life is kind of all like not super fun. He's being forced to marry some princess, and at this point, the kingdom is not doing super good. The king, I don't think we learn his name, not very good, but Reuben seems to be a decent guy. So then we kind of fast forward one day at Cello Port. Brooke is captured by Marines, and they're accusing him of stealing like some powder that the gangsters were supposed to give to the Marines. And then we see Reuben and Kendall, who, of course, at this point, Reuben is a prince. Kendall is like the battle commander, so she's the leader of the military force, come in and rescue Brooke. And we learn that Kendall didn't really know who Brooke was at this point. Reuben was just kind of going off doing his own thing, and they're wondering, where is he? He was hanging out with Brooke at the trash dump. At that point, Reuben saves Brooke. They bring him to the castle. We assume it's the castle where he's getting healed. And everyone's like, oh, that's where you've been. Who's this little guy? And that's when they get to meet Brooke. And Reuben says, okay, hey, still a prince at this point, not a king. This guy, get him a room in the barracks and let him learn music, which is where Brooke basically gets to learn music. And eventually we see that he probably becomes a part of the Raider squad, and then we'll start leading that squad, and then eventually become the battle commander. So at the beginning, we met him at 20. We saw him at 27. We went back to 11, and then we kind of go back, and then that's 1184. So we get to 1185, the current chapter. Reuben says, hey, Brooke, I want you to be the squire of Kendall, just kind of like an understudy. She's going to look after him. And of course, at this point, he's 11. We didn't see any more age jump here. He still looks very young. He's already hitting on Kendall and doing his usual thing. So that started very early, clearly. And at this point, Kendall is not married yet to Reuben. She mentions that she likes a guy that she can't really be with. He's out of her league. And Brooke's like, me? And she says, no, it's a different guy, which of course we assume is Prince Reuben. So at that point, we get like this weird. There's two events that happen. One of which is just like at some point the celestial dragons. Brooke is talking to Shuri about the celestial dragons came to port at one time, and like some stuff happened. But then that's when Shuri popped up, and then this is kind of that point where the king must have passed away, and then Reuben becomes a king. Shuri is born, and then the kingdom flourishes for a while because when Reuben is king, stuff is going a lot better. So we fast forward 1 year. That was kind of when Shuri was 14, is when Brooke and her were talking about what had happened in the past a little bit. Shuri is now 15. We're jumping around a lot, okay? Shuri is 15. Brooke is 28. She's a princess. He's the commander of the battle convoy. Her mom is Queen Kendall, and then her father is Reuben, who saved Brooke when he was 11. So he's 15. There's been a mist. Now, the mist is something we're starting in the theories here. It lasted for 6 months. It destroyed all the instruments on the island, and like hundreds of people got sick and died, including Queen Kendall. So there's a mist, and the idea that the mist is coming from Marcus Mars, and it makes a lot of sense. It's going to make sense from something further in the chapter, and also because he is the godhead of environment. So what does that mean? He could probably do something like this and create a mist that could potentially ruin the kingdom, and we're getting into a potential reason why he would have done that in a little bit here. So we have this mist that kills Queen Kendall, destroys all the instruments. It lasts for 6 months. Although the mist does eventually go away, the damage that it did was substantial. They can't make the heavenly tribute. They are affiliated with the royal government. When you can't make the heavenly tribute, there are problems. The royal government said, hey, okay, that's fine. That will be a problem. You just have to give us 1,000 slaves. And of course, Reuben, who is a good king, says, no, we're not going to do that. Brooke, hey, we're going to war with the royal government. They're going to come in 2 months, which is weird. I guess that was the deadline they gave them, or they were like something like that. That's probably how that went. And Brooke is like, all right, let's do this. The whole kingdom's freaking out, but Brooke starts singing, and now his singing is a lot better, and people are getting a little more okay with it. But then 2 months come, and this is where stuff hits the fan. It's kind of like right at the end of the chapter. The Marines do come, and they attack. And this all happens literally within like 2 pages. I guess it's 4 pages on a double page spread. The Marines come, we see a fighting, and then we see Brooke running into the castle, and there's just this one panel at the end that is really, really important. We see a demonic-looking Shuri standing over a slain Reuben, who has horns coming out. She's got horns and wings, so clearly, as we've seen, that's got to be Emu's ability. And we see the shadow of Marcus Mars in his, like, yokai form. And that's where the environment stuff makes a ton of sense. So that's where people are going, okay, that mist had to be by them. They wanted them to not be able to pay the heavenly tribute. Why? We don't really know. Potentially, it could be something related to Gunko, which I'll get into in a second. And Gunko is standing over her slain father and says, Brooke, the war's going to be over. Aren't you happy? And then we see Mars, and we see another guy in the back there. So now I want to get into some theories about what people are saying, what I think is happening here. Okay, so there's 3 things I want to talk about. The first of which I think is the least likely is there are people comparing Thriller Bark to Esperia, and it kind of makes sense from like a circular island standpoint. Brooke had mentioned Thriller Bark came from the West Blue. I don't really think that makes a lot of sense. Esperia had like a big harp on the top. It wouldn't Brooke have like mentioned that at some point? Like, holy hell, this is my homeland. He just mentioned it came from the West Blue, and boy, that would be very Oda-esque to trap Brooke like his soul or his shadow. He's just like sailing around an island that he grew up on. That would be really tough. I think we would have heard about that at some point. Also, like people mentioned, Thriller Bark was also God Valley because some of the corpses there were some of the members of the Rocks Pirates, but a lot of them escaped, and God Valley literally sunk into the ocean. So I don't think Esperia is Thriller Bark at all. And then I want to get into that character on the right. We're going to get into Gunko here in a second. But the character on the right is sparking a lot of controversy about who that is. Now, I just think it's a God's Knight. Now, the question is, who is the God's Knight and do we know him? There's a lot of suggestions, and I don't think any of them make sense, in my opinion. The big one you're going to hear is Kong. Now, Kong is one that makes the most sense to me, just for me. He's a part of the Navy, so there would be some connection there. Of course, he's not high enough to be a God's Knight, but there is some connection there. Timeline doesn't exactly add up, and from like a facial structure, I don't really see it. And we have seen Kong already as like a young man, so I don't think it's him or like his dad. I don't think so. Another person I've heard mentioned is Judge Vince Smoke's father, which makes sense from a point that like they have the same build. He's smoking a cigar, and like Brooke had remember that name, and it gave him chills to hear. So Brooke has a lot of moments where he just like remembers something from the past. Of course, he's 90 years old, so like when he hears something in the present, he might just go, "Wait a minute, did I have I ever heard that before?" So that's what that could be. Fusion I'm seeing about Mads and like Judge's involvement, because right with Kong, part of the world government, not necessarily part of the higher ups at the Gods Knights and the Gorsei, but you can kind of see where that would come from. The thing with Judge, although it looks similar, Brooke has mentioned him, the cigar thing. He was a part of Mads, but that was when they were freelancers. They didn't get picked up by the world government till later when they were kind of looked at as a threat. The likes of Vegapunk and Caesar were the only ones that really joined. Judge went his separate ways, and so did Queen. So Judge really was never part of the world governments. I don't see that coming at all. The last person you're going to see is Shiryu, which looks very similar. But here's what I actually think it is. So when I first saw him, first of all, it does kind of look like Don Mullen. I don't know how no one's mentioned that. Probably not who it is. What I think it is, it's related to Shuri and why Marcus Mars and everyone is there in the first place. That could be her father, which there's that little like couple panel selection where they had mentioned that Candel, before the mist and everything, the celestial dragons had come over there, and then she had become mysteriously ill for a bit, and then something happened. What could have happened is a celestial dragon came there, and that's where Shuri was actually formed, not actually Reuben. And they get married very quickly just so Reuben can cover her image, and then this is them returning for Gunko. Yeah. Again, kind of like another Jenny situation in Bonnie, it could be happening again, which is really unfortunate, but does explain a lot about why they were coming back for Gunko. And looking at this guy, he kind of has like that Myanmar, just like same style that we've seen before. We saw there was a member of God Valley, kind of like what Princess Cherie is wearing right now. So that could be where that's going, and the idea that she could actually really be a celestial dragon, and that Oda's going there again. Now, I have heard some other people mention that maybe Gunko is just being like seen as like some sort of new vessel for Emu, which I don't really know about that. I don't think it's Emu's vessel being a problem. I just think it's whatever happened close to the Void Century where he's just not able to leave the palace. Because, of course, we've seen Summers and Killingham mention that he cannot leave. Being out in the open is really harmful to him. And that's where people are getting the idea, and of course, with the blood, that maybe he needs a new vessel and it was Gunko. That doesn't really make sense to me at all because he would have already done that, or maybe he realized that Gunko just wasn't fit enough for him. I don't know. But that's also something that's being happening. So, in general, what I'm thinking is that's her real father. That's my headcanon. I think it's a God's Knight. I don't think it's a character we've met. I think it's a member of the Myanmar family, and that is likely what's going to happen. Now, I think there's a break next week, which is really unfortunate because this is quite the cliffhanger, what's happening, because I really, really hope we continue to get into this and see what really happened, everything that's going on with Brooke in his past, because somehow Brooke is the only one that makes it off the island. He, of course, meets up with the Rumbar Pirates, and then we meet him with the Straw Hats just, how many years later? 88, 28? I think this is when he's 28, right? So 60 years later, 88. Man, I think he dies at what 38, and then 50 years later sailing. Oh, that's rough. But yeah, that's kind of the general consensus on what's happening. If you guys think I missed anything or you have anything to add, let me know. The next video I think we're going to go over is the One Piece movie most of you forgotten, and if you didn't, you hate it. Really weird One Piece movie, the one that everybody kind of comes together and says was horrible. We're going to cover that next. Anyways, appreciate you watching. I'll see you guys next time.